Welcome to week 13, March 25th to March 31st, day 84 to day 90 of our chronological Bible study. We're done with the book of Joshua this week and moving into the book of Judges. We moved into a whole nother era of the Bible. We have left the Exodus era, gone through the conquest era, and now we've just entered the Judges era. And as far as our vertical and horizontal books go, remember horizontal books move us through time and vertical books interject during that time. So for example, the book of Job happens during the time of Genesis. So the book of Genesis is our horizontal book, Job is our vertical book. So where we're at today is we're finishing up Joshua in this video. We're entering the book of Judges. And soon the book of Ruth will take place during the era of Judges, during the book of Judges. The fighting men of the 12 tribes of Israel, over 600,000, have finally entered the promised land of Canaan. After 40 years of wandering, the promise made by God to Abraham, their ancestor, has finally been realized. In 2091 BC, Genesis 13 verses 14 and 15, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, "Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land you see I will give to you and your offspring forever." In Genesis 15 verses 13 and 14, he says, "Know for certain that your descendants," so same descendants he was talking about in the last verse, "will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. In 1446 BC, 645 years later, in Exodus chapter 3, verses 7 and 8, the Lord says to Moses, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt, and I have heard them crying out because of the slave drivers, and I have concern about their sufferings. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of the land." In verse 10, he says, "So now I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people and the Israelites out of Egypt." A few months later, in Exodus 24, the first generation entered a conditional covenant with God, promising to obey the law and care for the land that God is giving them as they serve as a kingdom of priests. In 1445, 1 year after leaving Egypt, Numbers 13 verses 25 and 33, the people arrive at the border of the lands of Canaan and they refuse to obey the Lord and conquer the land. Because of that, in Numbers 14 verse 22, "Not one of these people will ever enter the land," the Lord says. "They have all seen my glorious presence and the miraculous signs I performed both in Egypt and in the wilderness, but again and again they have tested me by refusing to listen to my voice." Verse 23, "They will never even see the land I swear to give their ancestors. None of those who have treated me with contempt will ever see it." In verse 29, he says, "You will all drop dead in the wilderness." Verse 34, "Because your men explored the land for 40 days, you must wander in the wilderness for 40 years. So none of those people that actually came out of Egypt are actually going to enter into the land of Canaan. It's going to be the second generation that does that. So 40 years later, in 1405 BC, Deuteronomy chapter 1 verses 2 and 3, we're told normally it takes only 11 days to travel from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea. But 40 years after the Israelites left Egypt, Moses addresses the people of Israel, telling them everything the Lord commanded him to say. So 40 years instead of 11 days. And there on the banks of the Jordan, across from Jericho, Moses gives this second generation the law. And remember, it was called Deuteronomy, or second telling of the law, second law. He gives them the law and reminds them of why and what they're about to do. And then Moses dies at 120 years old, and the torch is passed to Joshua. So we're using the wall chart of world history. Back at Babel, the descendants of the three sons of Noah all split up and they tribalized the earth. They all spread around the earth. Well, for this study, we're going to follow the line of Chaldea. Okay, this later on becomes Babylon. Mizraim, which becomes Egypt, and then Phoenicia, or the land of Canaan. So Abraham comes from the land of Chaldea. He's from Ur of the Chaldeans. He leaves Chaldea and then is told to go to the land of Canaan, which he does. For a short time he goes back to Egypt. He goes to Egypt.
And then he goes back to the land of Canaan, where he stays throughout this period. He has his son named Isaac, and then from Isaac comes Jacob, and Joseph then goes back to Egypt, and then later on, the other 70 members of the family of Jacob move into Egypt, and they're there in Egypt for those 400 years. Then Moses is born. He spends 40 years in Egypt. He goes to Midian, and then the Lord appears to him and tells him to bring the people out of Egypt. And after the 10 plagues, the people and Moses, he leads them for 40 years, and they go through the desert. And then finally, 40 years later, Joshua takes leadership of the Israelites.
And that's where we left off, 1405 BC. Now we're 1400 BC, so 5 years later. Joshua is a devout warrior who fears God, and the Israelites have already conquered 2 kingdoms. They've already conquered Jericho and Ai after crossing over the river Jordan. Joshua chapter 10. Adonai-Zedek, the king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had captured and completely destroyed Ai and killed its king, just as he had destroyed the town of Jericho and killed its king. He also learned that the Gibeonites had made peace with Israel. Remember, that was those people that pretended to be like they were from far away, and they deceived Joshua. So Joshua made a treaty with them, and he wasn't supposed to make treaties with the people from the land of Canaan. However, he was deceived. So because he had already made this treaty, he couldn't go back on it, and he made them their water carriers and woodcutters. But either way, the Gibeonites are protected. Verse 2, Adonai-Zedek and his people became very afraid, and when they heard all this, because Gibeon was a large town, as large as the royal cities and larger than Ai, which they had conquered already, and the Gibeonite men were strong warriors. So King Adonai-Zedek of Jerusalem sent messengers to several other kings. So we have this king of Jerusalem, and he sent out a message to all these other kings in his area. Come and help me destroy Gibeon, he urged them, for they have made peace with Joshua and the people of Israel. So these 5 Amorite kings combined their armies for a united attack. They moved all their troops into place and attacked Gibeon. The men of Gibeon quickly sent messengers to Joshua at his camp in Gilgal. Don't abandon your servants now, they pleaded. Come at once, save us, help us, for all the Amorite kings who lived in the hill country have joined forces to attack us. So because Joshua has already made this treaty with them, he has to honor his word, because if he doesn't honor his word, then he's breaking another commandment of God. So 2 wrongs don't make a right, so he's going to honor his treaty. So Joshua, verse 7, so Joshua and his entire army, including his best warriors, left Gilgal and set out for Gibeon. Don't be afraid of them, the Lord said to Joshua, for I have given you victory over them. Not a single one of them will be able to stand up to you. Joshua traveled all night from Gilgal and took the Amorite armies by surprise. So he ambushes them without them knowing that he's even coming. The Lord threw them into a panic, and the Israelites slaughtered great numbers of them at Gibeon. Then the Israelites chased the enemy along the road to Beth Horon, killing them all along the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As the Amorites retreated down the road from Beth Horon, the Lord destroyed them with a terrible hailstorm from heaven. That continued until they reached Azekah. The hail killed more of the enemy than the Israelites killed with the sword. On that day, the Lord gave the Israelites victory over the Amorites. Joshua prayed to the Lord in front of the people of Israel. He said, let the sun stand still over Gibeon and the moon over the valley of Elon. So the sun stood still and the moon stayed in place until the nation of Israel had defeated its enemies.
So for this portion, we're going to be using the Satellite Bible Atlas. So King Adonai-Zedek in Jerusalem sent word down to the other kingdoms to send their armies so they can attack Gibeon, because they were afraid that Gibeon was going to bolster Joshua's army. The Gibeonites sent word to Joshua. Joshua comes up in the middle of the night. Remember, we talked about it last week. This is uphill. They're coming up from the Jordan Valley, uphill, up into the mountains. And they marched all night long till they got to Gibeon. And then they easily overtook the Amorites. Then the Amorites started retreating through the mountain passes, started retreating. This brown area here is where they got rained on by hail. So you can imagine all these armies marching out of this narrow mountain pass down through here and then just getting pelted with hail the whole way.
The 5 kings from those nations end up hiding in a cave in Makkedah. So they're found by the Israelites, and then they put rocks over them until they've completely slaughtered all the armies there. After the armies are defeated, they come back, they remove the rocks, and they pull out the kings. Joshua has his men put their feet on their necks as a show of dominance that they've been conquered. And then Joshua impales them on poles. Verse 27. As the sun was going down, Joshua gave instructions for the bodies of the kings to be taken down from the poles and thrown into the cave where they had been hiding. Then they covered the opening of the cave with a pile of large rocks, which remains to this very day. So when the book of Joshua was written, the pile of rocks still remained there over the opening of the cave where the bodies of the 5 kings laid. Now that all of the kingdom's armies have been defeated, Joshua then just takes his army and heads south and then conquers all the cities in the south. In Joshua chapter 11, King Jabin Hazor then tries to do the same thing in the north. He summons all the rest of the kings from all the remaining tribes and has them come together to fight against this army that's invaded their land. In verse 4 it says, all these kings came out to fight, and their combined armies formed a vast horde. And with all their horses and chariots, they covered the landscape like sand on the seashore. And that's a lot of troops. The kings joined forces and established their camp around the water near Merom to fight against Israel. Then the Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them. By this time tomorrow I will hand all of them over to Israel as a dead man. Then you must cripple their horses and burn their chariots. So this was actually, in the old King James, it was they hamstrung them. So basically that just means that they were cutting the tendon in their legs so the horses couldn't run. You made the horse lame, basically. So they were making the horses lame and they were burning their chariots. So verse 7. So Joshua and all his fighting men traveled to the water near Merom. So he's moving his army of 600,000 up near Merom and attacked suddenly. So again, he attacks them before they're assembled, before they can mobilize. They're just getting all these armies together, and they're not really assembled. They have all these kings trying to figure out what their battle plan is and how they're going to move around to attack Joshua. Well, Joshua just waits till they're all there and then catches them unaware and gets them before they're ready to mobilize, before they even have a battle plan. And the Lord gave them victory over their enemies. In verse 8, the Israelites chased them as far as Greater Sidon, Misrephoth Maim, and eastward into the valley of Mizpah, until not one enemy warrior was left alive. Then Joshua crippled the horses and burned all the chariots as the Lord has instructed. Now remember, this army that he's wielding right now, this army that Joshua is leading, was raised on manna and quail and scavenging in the desert for 40 years. And they've been trained for this. They fought several wars before they even got to this point. They've conquered many kingdoms before they even got to this point. So Joshua is leading an elite fighting force, whereas the people that he's fighting have been sitting up in the hills. They've been well planted there. It's the land of milk and honey, so they've had plenty of food. Not to say they weren't powerful, but they've kind of become a little bit complacent. And Joshua takes advantage of that, as any great leader would.
The king up here has called all of the surrounding kings, which are these black dotted lines, all the other kings from the surrounding kingdoms coming in to this one specific place. And remember now, Joshua is down here because he just took over Makkedah. He just killed the kings that's in Makkedah. All the kings assemble over here. Before they're actually able to do anything to attack the Israelites, he just marches straight up and attacks them before they're ready to go. And then he pursues them all the rest of the way, all the way up into the north country, up around Mount Hermon, as far as even up there. So that's way, way north Israel. This would be the Sea of Galilee during Jesus' time. The Jordan River comes out of the bottom of that. Jericho and the Dead Sea are way, way down below there.
Later in Joshua 11, we have some more information about these giants. We've been following these giants because we know that eventually David has to slay a giant. So if we keep up with how these giants filter through time, we can understand where they come from during the time of David. So in verse 21, It says, during this period, Joshua destroyed all the descendants of Anak. Remember, that was that long ago descendant, great warrior who was a giant, who lived in the hill country of Hebron, Debir, and Anab, and the entire hill country of Judah and Israel. He killed them all and completely destroyed their towns. None of the descendants of Anak were left in the land of Israel, though some still remained in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. And if you'll recall, when David slays Goliath, Goliath is from Gath. So that's how there's giants in Gath that David ends up having to slay later on, hundreds of years from now. Verse 23, so Joshua took control of the entire land, just as the Lord had instructed Moses, and he gave it to the people of Israel as their special possession, dividing the land among the tribes, so the land finally had rest from war. So remember, the land was supposed to be divided up by tribes, by lot, but also by the size of the tribes. So remember, some tribes left Egypt really large, and then by the time they actually got there 40 years later, some tribes were really small. Like the tribe of Simeon was really small. The tribe of Levi was really small by the time they got to the land of Canaan. And that was all foretold by Jacob way back when he blessed his 12 sons after they came into Egypt and before Jacob died. In all, Joshua and the Israelites defeated 31 kings. And in Joshua 13, we're told some very important information. When Joshua was an old man, the Lord said to him, "You are growing old, and much land remains to be conquered. This is the territory that remains." And then all the territories are listed there. "I myself will drive these people out of the land ahead of the Israelites, so be sure to give this land to Israel as a special possession, just as I have commanded you. Include all this territory as Israel's possession when you divide this land among the 9 tribes of the half-tribe of Manasseh." So remember, there's 2.5 tribes on the east side of the Jordan River that were already given their land by Moses, before Moses passed on, before they crossed the Jordan River. And the men of those 2.5 tribes were of fighting age, 20 years of age or older, agreed to go across the river, conquer the land of Canaan with Joshua and the rest of the Israelites. And when the war was over, they were going to go back across the river to their side, to the land that Moses had already given them before he passed away. So we've got 2.5 tribes on the east side of the river, and we've got 9.5 tribes on the west side of the river. The rest of chapter 13 is Joshua then dividing up the land that they've conquered and the land that they still have yet to conquer amongst the 9.5 tribes. They're on the west side of the river. Remember, the Lord had promised to give Caleb and Joshua their own possession of land. Caleb comes from the tribe of Judah. Joshua comes from the tribe of Ephraim. So Caleb then gets his own allotment within the territory of Judah, and then Joshua gets his allotment that's within the allotment of Ephraim. And if we remember, the first time that they were supposed to invade the land of Canaan, Joshua and Caleb were the only 2 spies that had gone into the land and then come back and wanted to go ahead and invade 40 years earlier. So those 2 men were the only 2 to leave Egypt and then actually make it to the land of Canaan. That's why they each have their own special allotment of land. They had faith through the whole thing. Moses and Aaron and Miriam didn't even make it to the land of Canaan, but Joshua and Caleb did. Simeon and Levi, those 2 tribes, their forefathers were the 2 brothers who had gone and slew all the Shechemites. And because of that punishment, Jacob told them when they actually got to the land of Canaan, they would hardly own any territory. And now that's come into fruition. The tribe of Simeon is only going to own a little piece of land within the land of Judah. And the Levites now aren't going to own any land at all. They're the tribe of priests, and they're actually spread around throughout the 12 tribal territories into 48 different towns. So that's 4 towns in each of the 12 tribal areas. And each one of them had pasture land surrounding it. Chapter 21, verse 43, "So the Lord gave to Israel all the land he had sworn to give their ancestors, and they took possession of it and settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he solemnly promised their ancestors. None of their enemies could stand against them, for the Lord helped them conquer all their enemies. Not a single one of all the good promises the Lord had given to the family of Israel was left unfulfilled. Everything he had spoken came true. In Joshua chapter 22, verses 1 through 9, it says, Then Joshua called together the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. These are the tribes that live on the east side of the Jordan River. He told them, You have done as Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and you have obeyed every order I have given you. During all this time you have not deserted the other tribes. You have been careful to obey the commands of the Lord your God right up to the present day. And now the Lord your God has given the other tribes rest. So the tribes on the west side now have rest, as he promised them. So go back to the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you as your possession on the east side of the Jordan River. But be very careful to obey all the commands and the instructions that Moses gave to you. Love the Lord God, walk in all his ways, obey his commands, hold firmly to him, serve him with all your heart and all your soul. So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went home. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 4 and 5, the Lord said, Do not worship the Lord your God in the way the pagan peoples worship their gods. Rather, you must seek the Lord your God at the place of worship he himself will choose from among all the tribes, the place where his name will be honored. And in Joshua 18:1, where we find out that the land was under Israelite control, and the entire community of Israel gathered at Shiloh and set up the tabernacle. And Shiloh is in the land of Ephraim. That's Joshua's tribe. So not Jerusalem, the tribe of Judah. Ephraim, Shiloh. This plays into why in chapter 22, verses 10 through 34, the 2.5 tribes that are crossing back over into their territory, they build a little altar there and as a memorial. But the 9.5 tribes on the west side, they think that they're trying to build another altar to the Lord instead of going to Shiloh. They're trying to build another place of worship. So the 9.5 tribes on the west side of the river mobilize to go down and try to destroy these 2.5 tribes. The 2.5 tribes that live on the east side of the river are like, hey, wait, this is just a memorial, so you guys will remember that we are part of you, that we have the right to cross the river, to come to Shiloh, to worship God at Shiloh at the tabernacle. In Joshua chapter 23 and 24, Joshua does what he saw Moses do at the end of Moses' life before they crossed the Jordan River. Joshua reviews their history, how they got to where they're at, and he warns them to follow the law and commandments of God, and he renews their covenant. He renews the covenant with them. Okay, so he's setting them up for success here. This is all taking place about 25 years after they crossed the Jordan River. So we're about 1375 BC right now. But 430 years earlier, Joseph made his brothers promise that they weren't going to leave his bones in Egypt, that they would carry back to the land of Canaan. In Joshua chapter 24, verse 32, it says, The bones of Joseph, which the Israelites had brought along with them when they left Egypt, were buried at Shechem in the plot of land Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor for 100 pieces of silver. That's way back when. This land was located in the territory allotted to the descendants of Joseph, Ephraim. This correlates back to Genesis 50, verses 24 and 25, where Joseph says, Soon I will die, but God will surely come to help you and lead you out of this land of Egypt. He will bring you back to the land he solemnly promised to give Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath that he said, When God comes to help you and lead you back out of Egypt, back to the land of Canaan, you must take my bones with you. And then Joseph died at 110 years old. That was 430 years earlier from where we're at right now with Joseph. Later on, when Moses leads them out of there, we're told in Exodus chapter 13, verses 18b through 19, the Israelites left Egypt like an army ready for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph made the sons of Israel swear to do this. So it's interesting that Moses was a Levite. He was from the tribe of Levi. He gets the bones of Joseph. He keeps that promise to Joseph that his brothers made with Joseph way back when. And then he carries those bones of Joseph. Remember, he was embalmed like a mummy by the Egyptians. He carries those bones and then hands them over to Joshua, which is the next leader, which is from the tribe of Ephraim, which was Joseph's son. So it's technically a tribe of Joseph. And then he's buried, Joseph's bones are buried in the land of Ephraim, in the land of Joseph.
So the tribal allotments end up looking like this. You've got Judah here in the south, okay? And then south of Judah, you have a very small territory of Simeon. Then you have Ephraim, which is another powerful tribe right here, because remember, Joshua was from the tribe of Ephraim, where the tabernacle is Shiloh. So there, okay? So you got Judah and Ephraim, and squeezed between them is the tribes of Benjamin and Dan. Here's the Dead Sea, the Jordan River. Then you have the tribe of Manasseh, Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, some more tribe of Dan, that comes into play later on. You got the other half tribe of Manasseh, and what you have here, this is the clan of Machir. That's why they're split up. So this is one clan of Manasseh, and these are the other clans of Manasseh over here on the other side. That's how there's the 2.5 tribes on this side. The 2.5 tribes on the east side are Gad, Reuben, and the half tribe of Manasseh. And these are the other 9.5 tribes that are over on the west side. But they didn't actually conquer all the territory they were supposed to. So it ends up looking like this. The light green shaded area ends up being the tribal areas they actually conquered. And then the part that is still in the dark green is the parts that they haven't actually conquered until later on in the book of Judges. The book of Judges, Judah does then mobilize, and they actually get the whole of the land that they're supposed to. But the rest of the tribes all somehow fall short one way or the other in the way that they fall short of conquering all the territory that they're supposed to.
As we move into the book of Judges, remember back in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 18 and 20, there was judges there also. And judges comes from the word shofet in Hebrew. The word that they used for judge in Deuteronomy, shofet, is the same word that they use in the book of Judges for judge. It's also shofet. And back in Deuteronomy, he said, Moses told them, he said, appoint judges and officials for yourselves from each of your tribes and all the towns the Lord your God is giving you. They must judge the people fairly. So there's supposed to be a judge in each town. Okay, so there's supposed to be these pre-existing judges there. And every now and then, one of those judges during the Judges era, during the book of Judges, one of those judges will be elevated, be lifted up. The Holy Spirit will come into that judge, and then that judge will be empowered to throw off some invasion force or to accomplish a specific purpose. And you will see when we're reading the book of Judges that not all those judges are exactly the perfect leader. But nevertheless, God has put his hand on those judges for that specific purpose, for them to accomplish whatever it is that they have to accomplish. So in Judges chapter 1, verse 1, after the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, which tribe should go back to attack the Canaanites? The Lord answered. Now remember, Joshua is gone. So there is only the priesthood, the theocracy now, and you have the judges, which are like the little judges in each little town that are kind of like the elders, the ones that are in charge in that town. And then you have the priesthood that's in charge. So the theocracy is set up now. There's no more formal leader like Moses or Joshua over all the tribes. Each tribe is independent now, running their own affairs. The Lord answered, Judah, for I have given them victory over the land. So Judah, he says. The men of Judah said to the relatives from the tribe of Simeon, remember they're just to the south of them, join with us to fight against the Canaanites living in the territory allotted to us. Then we'll help you conquer your territory. So the men of Simeon went with Judah. When the men of Judah attacked, the Lord gave them victory over the Canaanites, Perizzites, and they killed 10,000 enemy warriors at the town of Bezek. While at Bezek, they encountered King Adoni-Bezek and fought against him. And the Canaanites, Perizzites were defeated. Adoni-Bezek escaped from the Israelites. The Israelites soon captured him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Because, in verse 7, Adoni-Bezek said, once I had 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off, eating scraps from under my table.
Now God has paid me back for what I did to them. They took him to Jerusalem, and he died there. The men of Judah attacked Jerusalem and captured it, killing all its people and setting the city on fire. Then they went down to fight the Canaanites living in the hill country in Negev and the western foothills. Judah marched against the Canaanites in Hebron, Kiriath Arba, and then they conquered the whole rest of their territory. So the tribe of Judah and Simeon helping them conquer the rest of their land, whereas the rest of the tribes don't accomplish that. If we talk about why they cut off their thumbs and their toes, well, if you cut off your big toe, you can't run. And then if you cut off your thumbs, you can't grab anything. You can only have 4 fingers. You can still do stuff, but you can't grab anything. It's really hard. It makes working hard. It makes doing anything. You can't wield a sword. You can't do any of those things. So now they've cut off the king's thumbs and his toes, so he can't march, he can't run, he can't fight, and he can't wield a sword or a dagger or anything else that he needs his opposable thumbs for. And the Israelites served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the leaders who outlived him, those who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. So Joshua's gone, the theocracy is in charge, each tribe is independently governing itself now with these judges and elders. Judges chapter 2 verse 10 says, after that generation died. So remember, the first generation left Egypt. The second generation conquered the land of Canaan. After the second generation died, another generation grew up who did not acknowledge the Lord or remember the mighty things he had done for Israel. And they go into worshiping other gods. They basically start just walking all over the commandments that God had given them. Go to Google and type in third generation curse. If you just type in third generation curse, you'll find all kinds of articles on how businesses fall apart in the third generation, how land and farms are lost in the third generation. It's always the third generation that has some kind of effect. So think about that. What generation are you? Are you the first? Are you the second? Are you the third? The way to keep this from happening, this third generational curse, is you have 2 generations and then you start over with the first. So that first one always works hard to accomplish whatever it is. The second one always takes over what their people had, whatever their ancestors had done. They take that over and they run it. And it's usually the third generation that's raised by the second generation, that's raised in privilege, that usually loses it. So in this case, the first generation left Egypt. They wandered in the desert, never made it to the land of Canaan. The second generation were the ones raised in the desert that were hardy, that were the warriors. They conquered the land of Canaan. They fulfilled the promise made to Abraham way back when. And now this third generation now, they've grown up in peace and security, raised by the second generation, and now they don't really appreciate it the way that the first or second generation would have. So in Judges chapter 2 verse 16, we're told the Lord raised up judges to rescue the Israelites from their attackers. Being raised up, that's the key part of that. Not that he makes judges. The judge is already there. He's raising them up. Yet Israel did not listen to the judges, but prostituted themselves by worshiping other gods. How quickly they turned away from the path of their ancestors who had walked in obedience to the Lord's commands. In verse 20, the Lord burned with anger against Israel. He said, because these people have violated my covenant, which I made with their ancestors, have ignored my commands, I will no longer drive out the nations that Joshua left unconquered when he died. Remember, because all the rest of those tribes, beside the tribe of Judah, all the rest of those tribes had left land that belonged to them, that was granted to them. They left it unconquered. I did this to test Israel, he says, to see whether or not they would follow the ways of the Lord as their ancestors did, like the second generation did. That is why the Lord left those nations in place. He did not quickly drive them out or allow Joshua to conquer them all. It was to see how this third generation is going to conduct themselves. Had the third generation followed suit and followed what their parents did, they would have went ahead and continued conquering the rest of their territory. They would have mobilized, they would have done something. The tribes would have come together to fight off these other nations that were in their territory one at a time, or they would have come up with something. But because they were comfortable and they were raised in that second generation peace, then they didn't have the drive to go and finish the job.
In Judges chapter 3, we're told that the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. It's verse 7. They forgot about the Lord their God, and they served the images of Baal and the Asherah poles. So these are other gods of the people that are in their land that they didn't drive out. And that's the reason why they were supposed to wipe them all out, because God told them they were going to infect them. Verse 8. Then the Lord burned with anger against Israel, and he turned them over to King Cushan Rishathaim of Aram Naharaim. That word Aram, that name Aram, means that this is far up north, up there near Syria, and what present-day Syria is. And the Israelites served this king for 8 years. When the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help, the Lord raised up a rescuer to save them. His name was Othniel, the son of Caleb's younger brother Kenaz. This is Caleb from the tribe of Judah. This is Caleb's nephew, who is the first judge, Othniel. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he became Israel's judge. And so then he went to war, and after that there was peace in the land for 40 years. Then Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. In verse 12, we see another judge come up. Once again, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, and the Lord gave King Eglon of Moab control over Israel because of their evil. Now remember, Moab was down here in the south, down across the river on the other side of the Dead Sea was the land of Moab. So the king of Moab from down there now is oppressing Israel. Eglon enlisted the Ammonites and the Amalekites. Remember our old friends, the Ammonites, which were the descendants of Lot, and the Amalekites, which they were the first ones to attack them when they left Egypt. They attacked them in the desert. He enlisted them as allies, and then he went out and defeated Israel, taking possession of Jericho, the city of palms, and the Israelites served Eglon of Moab for 18 years. So he took possession of Jericho. That would have been in the land of Benjamin. So the king of Moab joined forces with the Ammonites and Amalekites, and then invaded over and took over Jericho and some of those surrounding cities. That's the tribe of Benjamin there. Remember, Benjamin is nestled there between the tribe of Ephraim on the north and the tribe of Judah on the south. That's Caleb's tribe on the south and Joshua's tribe on the north. Remember, the tabernacle with the Ark of the Covenant is at Shiloh in the tribe of Ephraim. Verse 15, but when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help, the Lord again raised up a rescuer to save them. His name was Ehud, son of Gera. He was a left-handed man of the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, so that explains why. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. He's raising up this judge. The Lord is raising him up, this judge, raising him up from the tribe of Benjamin. And this is the land that's affected by this invasion. Now, Ehud was a left-handed guy. Most people, even today, are right-handed. So Ehud is left-handed, therefore he would carry his weapon on his right side of the body. You cross-draw, right? So if you're right-handed, you carried your sword on your left side, and you reached across your body and drew the sword from your left side. Well, Ehud is left-handed, and he keeps this dagger that's a foot long over on his right side. Okay, so when he's getting checked at the gate before he goes in to make this offering to this king of Moab, the guard is so used to checking right-hand people for weapons. He checked Ehud's left side because that's where everybody carries their swords, is on their left side because they're right-handed. But Ehud ain't right-handed, he's left-handed. He keeps his dagger over on his right side. And the guard probably failed to do that. So Ehud is allowed to march in, allowed to walk into the palace armed and go into the palace throne room of the king of Moab, who is oppressing Israel, who's oppressing his tribe, Benjamin. He goes in, he lays down the offering, the tribute that he has to give on behalf of Israel, and then he leaves, turns around like normal, walks back out the door, and as he's leaving, he passes these idols. And it just catches him wrong. It just, something about it just doesn't sit right with him. Even though all the land of Israel is being led astray by the people that they allowed to stay in their land, he knows this is the root of their problems. And he sees these idols and he knows that this right here, if he lets this go on, their nation is just going to be destroyed, as was foretold to Moses, was foretold to Joshua, as has been passed down to them. And him, as the judge, decides to intervene here. So he turns around at those idols. He marches back into the throne room of the king of Moab. And he says, I got a secret message for you. It's a message from God. And then the king of Moab says, okay, everybody out. Lock and seal the doors. So I can have this message. I can get this message from Ehud. Because these are the people of God. Yeah, what's your message? And then Ehud reaches over with his left hand from the right side of his body, pulls out this 12-inch dagger, and then sticks it so far up into this fat king's body that the handle, it disappears underneath all of his fat. And then he leaves it there, and now he's trapped inside this throne room. And he knows if he leaves, the guards are going to find out that he killed the king. So Ehud then escapes down the latrine. That word means toilet for you that have not been in any of the armed services. That he escapes down the latrine. We don't know much about the latrines during this time, but we know about latrines during the feudal era in Europe. And usually it would just be the royals who had this latrine, and they would defecate. It would go down this long tunnel down to what we know as the dungeon, which is the same space as the dungeon, and then someone down there would have to scoop it out, or it would all flow out into the moat which surrounded the castle. So we know that Ehud now, he's willing to go the distance. He's a great judge. He's now defeated this king that has oppressed them, and now he's also escaped, and he's allowed to go back to the tribe of Benjamin, back in their land. It says that the Israelites served Eglon of Moab for 18 years, but there was peace in the land after he killed the king of Moab. There was peace in the land for 80 years. So there's a long time of peace gone after the second judge named Ehud from the tribe of Benjamin. All right, that's about all we have this week. Keep reading. We're well into the book of Judges. We're going to meet Deborah. We got Samson coming up. So we can learn from these judges too, just like we can learn from the Israelites as they were in the desert, just like we can learn from the patriarchs while they were laying the foundation of all this stuff to happen. There's a lot we can learn about human nature. There's a lot we can learn about ourselves and learn about each other. And we can learn about God. We can learn about the nature of God during these studies. We'll see you next week as we go through the book of Judges. Have a good week.